A scream shatters the tranquil evening on the Nile cruise. Picture this. Detective James, a seasoned crime solver, is finally taking a breather. He's lounging on the deck of a luxury liner, cruising down the ancient Nile River, a refreshing drink in hand, and the sun's golden glow painting the water with warm hues. It's a moment of peace, of serenity, of utter relaxation. But then, a scream pierces the air, shattering the tranquility like a stone thrown into a calm pond. James's detective instincts kick in, all thoughts of vacation evaporating in an instant. He leaps to his feet, adrenaline pumping, and rushes towards the source of the disturbance. There, in one of the cabins, a macabre scene unfolds. A group of passengers huddle around the lifeless body of Mr. Winston, a wealthy businessman. The room buzzes with speculation and panic, but James takes control, transforming from vacationer to investigator in seconds flat. A body, a room full of suspects, and a detective on vacation. This was not how James imagined his cruise down the Nile. In the face of chaos, Detective James steps up. His instincts, honed from years in the field, kick into high gear. He takes control, clearing the cabin and securing the area as a crime scene. The sunset glow outside the cabin window is now a stark contrast to the grim reality inside. Laid out before him is the lifeless body of Mr. Winston, a wealthy businessman who was traveling with his wife and daughter. Stab wounds mar his body, yet there's a noticeable absence of defensive wounds. It paints a clear picture. Mr. Winston was taken by surprise. Detective James begins his investigation, methodically interviewing the passengers and crew. He's searching for the puzzle pieces, the fragments of truth hidden in their stories. As he listens, the image of Mr. Winston starts to take shape, not as a victim, but as a man with a complicated past. It turns out Mr. Winston wasn't just a businessman. He was involved in some shady dealings, the kind that make you enemies, and as James delves deeper, he finds that there are quite a few people on board who had reasons to want Mr. Winston dead. Among the initial suspects are his wife, who stood to inherit his fortune, a rival businessman nursing a grudge over a lost deal, and a mysterious woman seen arguing with Mr. Winston earlier that day. Each one of them has a motive, and each one of them could be the killer. But as James quickly realizes, this isn't a simple case of whodunit. The cruise ship is a floating web of lies and deceit, where everyone seems to have something to hide. The more he uncovers, the more elusive the truth becomes. With a room full of suspects and a growing list of motives, Detective James knew this was not going to be an easy case. Yet, he's undeterred. The investigation has only just begun, and he's ready to untangle this web, one thread at a time. Beneath the surface of this luxury cruise, secrets lurked. Detective James, a man attuned to the undercurrents of human behavior, found himself knee-deep in a web of deceit and betrayal. The victim, Mr. Winston, was not just a wealthy businessman, but a man embroiled in questionable deals and shady alliances. As James sifted through the evidence, he discovered a trail of breadcrumbs that led him straight into the heart of Winston's dubious dealings. The more he delved, the more he realized that Winston, in his quest for wealth and power, had made a few enemies along the way. And these enemies weren't just faceless entities, they were right here, on the cruise, sharing cocktails and polite conversation. Among the suspects, 3 stood out. First, Winston's wife, a poised woman with a steely gaze who, in the event of her husband's untimely demise, stood to inherit his vast fortune. Next, a rival businessman, whose resentment was as sharp as the knife that ended Winston's life. He had lost a lucrative deal to Winston, a defeat that left him seething with vengeance. And finally, a mysterious woman, cloaked in intrigue, who had been seen embroiled in a heated argument with Winston just hours before his death. As James pieced together the puzzle, a plot began to unfold. Winston's wife and daughter, it seemed, had been conspiring against him. Their plan was to hire the rival businessman to murder Winston, allowing them to walk away with the inheritance. But as it often happens in tales of deceit, their plan backfired. The businessman, driven by greed and resentment, had a plan of his own. He double-crossed the women, murdering Winston himself and setting them up to take the fall. A classic case of betrayal begetting betrayal, of lies spiraling out of control. Just as James thought he had untangled the web, a new thread emerged. A sharp-eyed passenger came forward, claiming to have seen the rival businessman sneaking into Winston's cabin on the night of the murder. This revelation was the missing piece of the puzzle. It connected the dots, painting a picture of treachery and deceit that was as chilling as the Nile at midnight. With this final piece of evidence, James was able to put together the pieces of the jigsaw. The rival businessman was arrested. And Mrs. Winston and her daughter, despite their initial plot, were cleared of any involvement in the murder. Just when he thought he had all the answers, the case took a turn that left James questioning everything. The web of deceit had been untangled, but in its wake, it left a trail of questions. Questions about human nature, about the lengths people would go to for power and wealth, about the secrets that lurked beneath the surface of polite society. As James sat on the deck, the Nile flowing silently past, he knew his vacation was far from over. The river, like the case he had just solved, held many more secrets waiting to be unraveled. In a mystery as deep as the Nile, finding the truth requires patience and a keen eye. And that's exactly what Detective James had. A keen eye, honed by years of solving the most baffling of cases. But this case, the murder of Mr. Winston, was proving to be a puzzle with pieces that didn't quite fit. Enter the observant passenger, a quiet woman with a knack for noticing the unnoticed. She approached James with a crucial piece of information. She had seen the rival businessman, the one who had lost a deal to Winston, sneaking into Winston's cabin. This was the break James needed. He had suspected the rival businessman, but with no proof, it was just a hunch. Now, with this eyewitness account, the puzzle pieces began to fall into place. James confronted the businessman, his eyes piercing through the man's facade. Cornered, the businessman confessed. He had indeed murdered Winston, but the plot ran deeper than anyone could have imagined. The businessman revealed that Mrs. Winston and her daughter had hired him to kill Winston, but greed had got the better of him. He killed Winston himself, planning to frame the women for the crime. It was a chilling revelation. A family entangled in a web of deceit and murder, but the truth, as it often does, had come to light. James wasted no time. He alerted the ship's security, and the rival businessman was promptly arrested. Mrs. Winston and her daughter were taken into custody, their faces a picture of shock and relief as they were cleared of any involvement in Mr. Winston's murder. With the truth revealed, justice was served. The cruise ship continued its journey down the Nile, the golden glow of the setting sun reflecting off the tranquil water. But for James, the journey was far from over. The Nile, like life itself, held many more secrets, and he was ready to unravel them, one mystery at a time. As the Nile cruise continued, James found himself reflecting on the case. Aboard the luxurious ship, under the golden glow of the setting sun, the Nile seemed an unlikely scene for such a grim affair. Yet, beneath the surface of this ancient river, as with the passengers on this cruise, there were secrets waiting to be uncovered. James replayed the events in his mind, the scream that had shattered the peaceful evening, the sight of Mr. Winston's lifeless body, the whirlwind of speculation among the passengers, the frantic search for clues, the interviews, the lies and deceit. It was like a complex puzzle, each piece revealing a new layer of intrigue. He thought about the suspects, Mr. Winston's wife, the rival businessman, the mysterious woman. Each had a motive, and each had something to hide. The investigation had been like navigating a maze, with each turn leading to more questions than answers. His mind lingered on the shocking twist, the double cross that had turned the case on its head. He marveled at the cunning of the rival businessman, who had used the women's plot as a cover for his own crime. It was a reminder, he mused, that people are capable of anything when driven by greed and desperation. He thought about the sharp-eyed passenger who had witnessed the businessman's secret visit to Winston's cabin. Without that crucial piece of information, he might never have solved the case. It was a testament to the importance of being observant, of noticing the small details that others might overlook. James sipped his drink, his gaze fixed on the horizon. He had come here seeking a break from his usual routine, a chance to relax and unwind. But as a detective, he realized, there was no such thing as a vacation. Even here in the heart of the Nile, mystery and intrigue were never far away. Another mystery solved, but the Nile, like life, is full of unexpected turns. Who knows what the next bend might bring? His vacation was far from over, and he found himself looking forward to whatever came next. The Nile, with its ancient secrets and timeless allure, was waiting to reveal its next story.